Joining us now, member of the House Judiciary Committee, Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania. She also serves as vice chair of the Bipartisan Women's Caucus. The Congresswoman has a new piece this morning in the Philadelphia Inquirer entitled, "It's Time for an Impeachment Inquiry." I think a lot of people would agree with you. You look at the facts, Congresswoman Dean, and, you know, they're there. It's all deeply disturbing. But isn't there some political strategy at play here in terms of timing and also getting Republican support?
Absolutely. I'm certain we're going to need Republican support. We're going to need public persuasion. We're going to need to make sure the American people know what has happened. And that's why I'm pleased that we have Special Counsel Robert Mueller coming before our committee on the 24th.
And what do you hope that Robert Mueller can accomplish beyond his report that will help push an impeachment inquiry into sort of the public mindset and maybe even rally some Republicans? I mean, what can he do that hasn't been done yet?
What he can do is bring to life the Mueller report. I don't care. Some people say, oh, well, he won't go beyond the four corners of that document. There's so much within the four corners of that document that the American people do not yet know that I'll be delighted if he can help us bring to life the contents of the report, whether it's the welcoming and wallowing of foreign interference in our elections, more than 100 contacts with that campaign, with Russians, Russian nationals, Russian governmental officials, welcoming and wallowing in it, or the obstructive behavior that took place that is detailed in Volume 2. There's so much there. Imagine that this administration wanted to win based on help from a foreign foe. Think of what that says about what this president thinks about our democracy.
Congresswoman, you know, as a lawyer, when you read the Mueller report, especially anybody who's spent any time on prosecuting cases, it is so clear that there are really indictable and certainly impeachable offenses within the four corners of the report. I agree with you that this hearing will bring those facts to light. Right. But how do you reconcile the desire for an impeachment inquiry with the polling that we see over the weekend, where now the support for impeachment among the American people is down to 21%. It's not even 50% among Democrats. So how do you reconcile the political reality that the country is not there, versus, which is going to be pretty important if we have any impeachment inquiry is actually going to capture their attention and hold their attention? How do you reconcile that?
Well, one of the problems that we've had is this confusion, public confusion that Robert Mueller actually talked about, with AG Barr coming out, mischaracterizing the report, allowing a mischaracterization to lay out there before the American people for a month, and all the obstructive behavior that's happened in the meantime. We tried to bring AG Barr before us. He ignored and stayed away from our subpoena. We did the same with McGahn. When McGahn failed to come before us, that's when I decided we should call for the impeachment inquiry. So this administration has been very effective at obstruction, both detailed in the report and of our constitutional obligation. We have a duty, a patriotic duty. So I get that the polls are where they are. That's why, and Mueller will be an important, pivotal step to hear his voice come to life and tell us the elements of obstruction.
So, Representative Dean, I am completely convinced by that argument. But how do you convince Speaker Pelosi of that, about that argument? How do you convince her?
I don't think I'm in conflict with Speaker Pelosi. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, I find myself sort of in the front line. I've actually had colleagues come to me on the floor and say to me, they're on other committees, and say to me, you've come forward with impeachment inquiry. Why is that? And I give them the details of how obstructive this administration has been to our oversight. So I believe I'm sort of doing the work of the committee as a worker bee in the front line, and I believe the Speaker's job is so much different. She has to shepherd an entire caucus. She has to lead an entire Congress. She's somebody who quotes Abraham Lincoln all the time about, without public sentiment, almost nothing is possible. With it, almost anything is possible. We have to bring public sentiment along by way of our patriotic duty of oversight.
Well, in talking about Democratic strategy, there was a kerfuffle of sorts last week between Nancy Pelosi and some members of the caucus, specifically freshmen, where she asked that they, if they have an issue, come to her and don't tweet. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took it very personally, thought it was focused on the 4 freshmen, specifically her, and even said that it was racially charged, which took it to a whole new level. In her latest column for the New York Times entitled Scaling Wokeback Mountain, Maureen Dowd writes in part this: the 79-year-old speaker and the 29-year-old freshman are trapped in a generational and ideological tangle that poses a real threat to the Democrats' ability to beat Donald Trump next year. AOC should consider the possibility that people who disagree with her do not disagree with her color. Congress is not a place where you achieve radical progress, certainly not in divided government. It's a place where you work at it and don't get everything you want. The progressive acts as though anyone who dares to disagree with them is bad, not wrong, but bad, guilty of human failing, some impurity that is moral evil that justifies their venom. In the age of Trump, there is no more stupid proposition than that Nancy Pelosi is the problem. If AOC and her Pygmalions and acolytes decide that burning down the House is more important than deposing Trump, they will be left with a racist, backward president and the emotional satisfaction of their own purity. And
yeah.
I couldn't agree with that more.
Well, what a great line. If Nancy Pelosi is your problem, I mean, what a stupid proposition. In the
last time I checked, she's done this before.
Of Trump. Yeah. Claire, I wanted to go to you briefly here. I mean, I would be a complete hypocrite if I condemned what AOC and other firebrands were doing their first year in Congress, because I did the same from the right. And I spent the rest of my time trying to build bridges, even though I still was taking pretty absolute positions on balancing the budget, taxes, et cetera, et cetera. But it is, though, after a time you figure out you can't do anything by yourself there. And you do hope that some freshman members of this class, just like people were hoping freshman members of my class would understand that before they did too much damage to their own careers and to the caucus they represent.
Yeah, I think the thing that was really the head scratcher for me, and frankly really made me angry, was the notion that AOC's chief of staff, a staffer, would go after Sharice Davids. This Congresswoman knows Sharice Davids. She is history-making in Congress. She is the first Native American elected to Congress. She is the second open lesbian elected to Congress. She represents a suburban district in Kansas where she deposed a Republican who had been in office for a long time. She and other freshmen are the face of us taking the majority in Congress. It is not the only 2 people who won primaries. We had dozens of people beat Republicans. The notion they would go after her personally and that he would call her by her first name in a tweet, really, what the hell? That is just outrageous. Yeah. And I think I do want to thank Donald Trump, though, briefly, because were it not for his tweets yesterday morning, we would be spending all morning talking about this division. Instead, he has done what only he can do. He has reminded us that our unity, as Nancy Pelosi said, our unity is our power. And I think that he really backfired what he did, because I think it has kind of glossed over this division and brought us back to what the main goal is here, which Maureen Dowd articulated so well, and that is deposing Donald Trump.
And Karine, in 2016, a lot of young people who are totally devoted to AOC and everything that she says, legitimately so, because she's breaking new ground for the Democratic Party. What are the odds that these young people who sat on their hands and did not vote in 2016 can be encouraged by AOC to vote in order to achieve one goal only: defeat Donald Trump?
Well, Barnacle, I'll say this. In 2018, we saw some historical numbers among the millennials, among the young voters. They came out in historical numbers, and we saw that just across the board, but with young people. So I think they are paying attention, and I think they are listening. And I have to say that, look, the infighting, I wish that it stops. There are kids in cages. There are families being separated. You have Donald Trump who is shredding the Constitution and just does not care about the position that he holds, a very incredibly powerful position that he holds. But it is a complicated scenario here because the four women, the squad as they're called, they also represent a big part of the base that we do need to excite, that we do need to get involved, just like as you were mentioning, these young people, Barnacle. But I'll go back to this for a second because I think this is really important, and this is what you all were talking about with the NBC and Wall Street Journal polling that came out, the head-to-head with Donald Trump and essentially the tier one Democrats in the primary. This is my cautionary tale. Yes, Donald Trump can't go above 42, 43, and on an average, the Democrats beat him between 45 and 48 percentage points. Here's the thing: we can all agree that Democrats are probably going to win the popular vote, right? Because of the way the demographics are set. The problem is Donald Trump could get 42% and still win with the Electoral College votes if we don't get back Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And that's the cautionary tale for folks. So we have to stay focused. We have to keep our eye on the ball, which is Donald Trump, which is winning in 2020, holding him accountable. We have to hold him accountable. And that's the really important thing here.
Following up on Corinne's point, I was speaking to a smart political strategist in the recent days whose current prediction is that Donald Trump would lose the popular vote by more this time around, but still thread the needle in the Electoral College. So I think that is certainly true. Congresswoman, I want to ask you a final question, switching gears, about these ICE raids that are scheduled for this weekend, which seem to have largely been not lived up to as advertised. But I think it's important to note there are pictures circulating around social media the last day or so about neighborhoods like Sunset Park, Brooklyn, or Astoria, Queens, very immigrant-heavy neighborhoods, where on Sundays usually parks will be filled with soccer games and families walking around. And they seemed really empty this weekend. So I think there was certainly a fear element there. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've heard in terms of what happened with these raids and what might happen next? Could there be another wave?
Well, it's just one more example of this president sowing hatred, fear, division in our country. In my own district, we put out information about what people's rights were when somebody comes to your door with an ICE warrant, that you do not have to open the door unless they have a proper search warrant for your property. So this was the president in a collapsed way, saying in advance he was going to do these things, then recognized that was a bad idea because people were going to stay back and stay home and protect themselves and their families. It's just more of the chaos. I have to tell you, I was also at the border recently. You pair this immigration policy, chaos policy, with the inhumanity that I saw at the border. Women, 56 days held in the elements and came inside the very day that we were there. Their lips were cracked open with exposure. They were in a cell, and I counted it, 10 cinder blocks by 13 cinder blocks. They had one toilet for 15 women. They had no running water, and they were told to drink out of the toilet. That water was clean enough. This is the inhumanity and the utter incompetence of this administration. And then you pair that with this weekend's fear tactic. We're going to come raid and take people away. And I'd also love to talk to you about what I saw at Homestead. 2,300 children being held for profit at Homestead. I went there with John Lewis and many other colleagues, and he said, we came to bear witness, and what we witnessed was warehousing of children for profit. The final thing they showed us, which was stunning to me, they showed us a room that was like an air traffic control room, and they were bragging, frankly, about following these travelers, very different travelers, little children. They showed us one large screen, which was tracking the last 14 days of the children's minority, meaning when they were aging out. And it showed the day that we were standing there, one child was aging out, was turning 18 that day. We said, what happens to that child? They said, oh, they'll be taken by ICE. We've been in touch with ICE all along. I said, and are they taken out in shackles? They tried to say no, and then they said, oh, yeah, they are. We had 2 aging out the next day. $775 a day per head for profit on these children, and they watch them age out.
Who's the
and
profit
go out
go to?
To this private company.
What's the company?
Byrne. It ends with Byrne. Caliburn. And you know that former Chief of Staff John Kelly is on the board there. $775 per head per day, and then they watch them go out in shackles.
All right, Congresswoman,
That
thank you so much.
Is what we need to be focused on, and thank you so much for bringing it to light.
Thank you very much.
That's incredible. It's just...
Coming up, political sabotage by tweet, Mika.
New reporting says President Trump purposefully punished a moderate Republican by endorsing him. Politico's Tim Alberta joins us with his new book, also ahead.
While we hear some Democrats in Washington, D.C. referring to U.S. Customs and Border facilities as concentration camps, what we saw today was a facility that is providing care that every American would be proud of.
Wow. Vice President Mike Pence toured 2 border facilities on Friday and then defended the conditions inside. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.